Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamunati Ravanachari. Yamunati Ravanachari. Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari. Gopi Jana Vallabha Girivaradari. Yasodanandana Braja Janaranjana. Yamunati Ravanachari. Jaya Vishnupad Paramahamsa Parivajikacharya Asatara Sata Shri Srimad Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Prabhupada Ki Jai. ISKCON Founder Acharya Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai. Anantakoti Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai. Namacharya Srila Haridas Thakur Ki Jai. Prem Shri Kaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasadi Gaur Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Shri Shri Radha Krishna Go Gopinath Shai Mukunda Radha Kunda Giri Govardhana Ki Jai. Vrindavan Dhama Ki Jai. Mathura Dhama Ki Jai. Navadvip Mayapur Dhama Ki Jai. Jagannath Puri Dhama Ki Jai. Gangamaya Jamuna Devi Ki Jai. Bhakti Devi Ki Jai. Tulsi Maharani Ki Jai. Samaveta Bhaktivinoda Ki Jai. Gaur Premanande. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to the assembled devotees. All glories to Sri Guru and Gauranga. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Nama Om Vishnupadaya. Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale. Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namane. Namaste Sarasvati Deve Gauravani Pacharane Nirvisesa Sunyavadi Paska Chadeshatarane. Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Yuta Padakamalam Shri Gurun Vaishnavamscha Shri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Raghunatham Vitam Stam Sajivam Sadvaitam Sadvadutam Parijana Sahita Krishna Chaitanya Devam Shri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Vishakam Vitamscha Vanchakalpachubhascha Kripa Sindhavyevacha Patitanam Pavanevyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So it's September 6, 2024, New Dwarka, Los Angeles. Reading from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 3, Chapter 25, The Glories of Devotional Service, Text 30. Tade tanme vijānīhi yathāhaṁ manda-dhīr hare sukhaṁ buddhyeya durbodham yoṣā bhavad-anugrahāt Please chant. Any ladies? Etan me vijānīhi yathāhaṁ manda-dhīr hare sukhaṁ buddhyeya durbodham yoṣā bhavad-anugrahāt etan me vijānīhi yathāhaṁ manda-dhīr hare sukhaṁ buddhyeya durbodham yoṣā bhavad-anugrahāt etan me vijānīhi yathāhaṁ manda-dhīr hare sukham durbodham yoṣā bhavad-anugrahāt tad etat, that same, may, to me, vijānīhi, please explain, yathā, so that, aham, I, manda, slow, dhīḥ, whose intelligence, hare, O my Lord, sukham, easily. What else does sukham mean? Happiness, yes. Buddhyeya, may understand. Durbodham, very difficult to understand. Yoṣā, a woman. Bhavat-anugrahāt, by your grace. Srila Prabhupada's translation. This is Devahūti speaking. My dear son Kapila, after all, I am a woman. It is very difficult for me to understand the absolute truth because my intelligence is not very great. But if you will kindly explain it to me, even though I am not very intelligent, I can understand it and thereby feel transcendental happiness. Srila Prabhupada's purport. Knowledge of the absolute truth is not very easily understood by ordinary, less intelligent men. But if the spiritual master is kind enough to the disciple, however unintelligent the disciple may be, then by the divine grace of the spiritual master, everything is revealed. Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura therefore says, yasya prasādād, by the mercy of the spiritual master, the mercy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, bhagavat-prasādaḥ, is revealed. Devahūti requested her great son to be merciful towards her because she was a less intelligent woman and also his mother. By the grace of Kapiladeva, it was quite possible for her to understand the absolute truth, even though the subject matter is very difficult for ordinary persons, especially women. Tad etan me vijānīhi yathāhaṁ manda-dhīr hare sukham buddhyeya durbodham yoṣā bhavad-anugrahāt. My dear son Kapila, after all, I am a woman. It is very difficult for me to understand the absolute truth because my intelligence is not very great. But if you will kindly explain it to me, even though I am not very intelligent, I can understand it and thereby feel transcendental happiness. So let's look at this sukham buddhyeya durbodham. Durbodham, very difficult, buddhi, to understand. Dur means difficult. Something that's very difficult to understand. Buddhyeya, I can understand. Sukham, easily and happily. Isn't that nice when that happens? There's something really hard. You know how we often put off doing things that we think are going to be very hard? Yes? And sometimes, although we've put it off and put it off, we go to do it and we're like, oh, that was easy. Does that happen sometimes? Not always. Sometimes you put it off and you do it and you're like, oh, that's why I was putting it off. But this is the ideal, that even something that's very difficult becomes very easy. And what's the most difficult thing to understand? Who is God? What is the absolute truth? What is the purpose of life? Who am I? What am I doing here? Why is there suffering? These are the most difficult things to understand. Much more difficult to understand that than, advanced chemistry. People have been wrangling over the answers to these questions since the beginning of time. The greatest sages, the greatest philosophers, trying to understand, is there a God? What is the absolute truth? What is the nature of God? Who am I? How do I achieve that perfection? What is perfection? Why is there death? All these sort of questions why are they so difficult to understand? Because we can't understand them just with our senses and our mind. I mean, you can understand with your senses and your mind that there must be some intelligence behind the world. That you can understand. And you can understand something about that intelligence. You can understand that it's very orderly and also unpredictable. Right? The planets you can predict 1,000 years in advance, but you can't necessarily predict when there's going to be an earthquake. So orderly yet unpredictable, full of variety. Both competitive and loving. Right? The world works on the competition within species, between species, but also with the love within species, and sometimes between species. So you can understand something of the nature of the Creator with your mind and your senses, but you kind of hit a block, right? You can understand there has to be one ultimate Creator, like the Yamadutas explain to Yamaraj. You can't have two gods that are in competition, which seems to be the modern Christian idea, this like God and the devil kind of battling it out. But this you can understand. But to understand much more than that, very, 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 very difficult. But to make it easy, that's the best teacher. The best teacher can take a very difficult subject and make it easy. And not only easy, but fun. Sukham. Where you're like, oh, that was fun. You ever had a teacher like that? You had a really difficult subject matter, like really difficult. You're just looking at the textbook and going, oh my God, how will I ever understand this? And you go to the class and it becomes not only easy, but it becomes fun. So that is what we want for spiritual life. And here we're seeing how to achieve that. There's an interplay going on here. So Devahūti is exhibiting what quality of a devotee? Humility. And she's asking for what? Anugrahāt, she's asking for grace. So there's this interplay of humility and grace that when they intersect, difficult things become easy. Difficult knowledge becomes fun and easy. Now this is true even in the mundane sense. It's true even for ordinary things. That when there's an interplay of humility and grace, difficult things become fun and easy. And how much more so that is true in transcendence. Right? And we read about how difficult things become easy. What does Krishnadas Kaviraj say? What's his analogies for difficult things becoming easy? And what happens when you get the grace of Lord Chaitanya? What are the analogies that he gives, sort of the metaphors? Oh, I like that one. And can I wait 1 minute for that one? Because that's from the Bhagavatam. Everything else becomes insignificant. Yes. All of the things that people aspire for, wealth and power and, all of them become completely insignificant. All of one's attachments, all of one's nartas, which relate to what you're saying. But Krishnadas Kaviraj also says, when you get this mercy, even if even if you're a dumb person, you can speak, you can become a great orator. And even if you're lame man, you can cross mountains. So no matter how unqualified you are, you become qualified. In the example you gave, that the ocean turns into a puddle. And which is also related to your point, So this particular metaphor is given by the demigods when they're praying to Krishna in the womb of Devaki, and it's given again by Lord Brahma. So that's in the 2nd chapter of the 6th canto, and then the 14th chapter of the 10th canto, it's given again by Lord Brahma when he sees all the apparent cowherd boys and calves turn into Vishnu forms. He says there's this great ocean of material suffering and anarthas and difficulties. It feels like that, yes? Do any of us have some anarthas that feel like the Pacific Ocean? And when you take shelter of the Lord, boom, it becomes a little puddle that you can easily step over without practically even noticing the puddle. So these are many examples of things that are very difficult that become easy. Right? Krishna says, Bahunam Janmanam Mante. It takes many, many births. And Srila Prabhupada's telling us that if we just chant 16 rounds and follow the 4 regulative principles, we can attain Krishna consciousness in 1 birth. That's taking something that's extremely difficult, that generally takes many, 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 many lifetimes. And he's saying, and we have short lifetimes in Kali Yuga, yes? If we make it to 80, people are surprised. Like I realize once you hit 60, nobody's surprised if you die anymore. I went to speak, 80 or 100, it's unusual. So even in this short lifetime and a difficult lifetime, we have Devahūti's calling herself manda-dhīr, unfortunate intelligence. So in Kali Yuga, we're all manda sumanda matayo. We're all stupid in Kali Yuga. I mean, just the air we breathe is polluted. The water we drink is polluted. The food we're eating is polluted. There's everything is polluted. One time, Prabhupada was talking about how he was worried that a war between Pakistan and India might become another world war. And Rameshwar Prabhu said, well, then it'll be a nuclear war and there won't be any food. Everything will be polluted. And Prabhupada said, this whole world is already polluted. We live here. And in Kali Yuga, everything is super polluted. And so we have this unfortunate short lifetime, but now it's become easy. It becomes easy. So how do we make difficult things easy? So we're going to look at humility and we're going to look at grace. So let's look at humility. So Devahūti here is she just like some earth lady? Who is Devahūti? Who's her parents? Swayambhuva Manu and Sadarupa. And who are they? They're the chief Prajapatis in the universe. And how did they appear? They're actually a manifestation of Lord Brahma. Lord Brahma manifested himself as these 2 personalities. So who in the world is she? She's not human. Okay? She's not a human, and she's certainly not in Kali Yuga. She's a great goddess from the beginning of the creation. And she's the mother of God. Okay? So if she's going to say, well, I'm just a woman and I don't know much. This is her humility. We hear Srila Viśvanātha Cakravartī Ṭhākura speak like this. He'll say, I'm a great materialist. Is he a great materialist? No. Or what about Krishnadas Kaviraj? What does he say about himself? I'm lower than a worm in stool. Now, when we hear these things, it may sound to us like somebody needs to see a therapist. It's like, what's wrong with your self-esteem and your confidence? Maybe you've got clinical depression or something. You're like this great demigoddess appearing at the beginning of creation. She's so powerful. I mean, not only she's the mother of God, she's also the mother of these 9 daughters who join with the sages to produce all the living beings in the universe. And yet you're speaking like that. Oh, I'm kind of dumb, she's saying. Manda-dhīr, I'm kind of dumb. So the devotee actually feels like that. Now, why does the devotee feel like that? Well, this is a very important thing to understand. Because anybody who's in this world, anyone who's in the material world, unless they're Nitya Siddhas come for some preaching, but even then they feel like they're part of this world, is here because of rebellion against God. And that is the ultimate in stupidity. It's the absolute ultimate in being disqualified. It's the ultimate crime. I mean, from a karmic point of view, you know, somebody who goes around torturing and raping and killing, obviously that's a much worse karmic crime than some very moral, pious person who's in rebellion against God. But the act of being in rebellion is the root of all sinfulness. Just like we know in our ordinary life, if somebody is very generous to us and takes care of us and does a lot for us, and we're ungrateful and we turn our back on them and we deride them, or we try to steal things from them, a betrayal. And most of us understand betrayal as the worst kind of evil. Biting the hand that feeds you. So any of us who have a mood of rebellion against God, that's our mentality. And so when the devotee sees that in themselves, they say, I don't have any intelligence. I'm just materialistic. When I was in graduate school, I would go there in Sari and Tilak, but I didn't talk about Krishna consciousness unless somebody asked me. I didn't put it in their face. Of course, every semester, the last class, a lot of people would ask me. But anyway, in one of my classes, the professor was asking us to define the term materialist. So I thought, okay, well, here's an opportunity. So I gave a definition of materialist. And the next class, when he came, he said, you know, I was really thinking about what Edith said, and I realized that I'm a materialist. When I first stayed joined the Hare Krishna movement and stayed in the ashram, and I was coming to classes, and the devotees in the morning were bashing the materialists in the Bhagavatam classes. And I'd be sitting in the temple room thinking, yeah, those materialists. And after a couple months, I was like, oh, wait a second. That's talking about me. And when you really see that, you really see that I am the greatest sinner of all sinners. I'm the most foolish. I'm the most fallen. Again, if we're talking about karmic crimes, that's a different measurement. Do you follow what I'm saying? When the devotees are saying I'm the most sinful of all sinners, it doesn't mean they're like some kind of Hitler or something. That's not what they mean. But they mean that my basic heart is in the wrong place. I have an exploitive motive and a selfish motive. And having this kind of humility, my dear friends, is a source of great joy. It is not like material self-esteem, where you actually think you're a wonderful person, but you're depressed by the fact that although you think you're supposed to be great, you sort of realize that you're not. It's not that. It's where you deeply see yourself honestly, and it's joyful for several reasons. First of all, it's very liberating. We walk around in our life trying to pretend that we're wonderful, whereas we all know in our heart of hearts that we're not so wonderful as we pretend to be. Yes? Everybody has this problem? We all know that we're not quite as smart, and not quite as nice, and not quite as selfless, and not quite as devoted as the show we put on to others, or as we even pretend to ourselves. And we're constantly carrying this burden around with us of pretending to be something that we're not. And when you actually access this humility, it's like, shh, wow. I can be authentic. Many people have asked me, what was your first strong impression meeting Srila Prabhupada? And I'd say overwhelmingly it was his authenticity. There was no pretense. Kind of like a very, very young child hasn't developed that sort of pretense yet. And Srila Prabhupada was like that. But also, humility is necessary if you want to make very difficult things easy. In Bhagavad Gita 13:18-12, where Krishna lists the items of knowledge, the first one is amanitvam, humility. Why? Prabhupada says that's the beginning of the ladder, later in that purport. Have you ever tried to teach somebody if they think they already know? Does that work? Or can you teach someone who thinks they're better than you? Does that work? Anybody ever tried to do that? Try to teach somebody something. Oh, yeah, I already know it. I don't have to listen to you. It doesn't work. Or try to teach somebody who's unwilling to take correction. Whoa, have you ever done that? Even someone comes and asks you for help. Hey, can you help me with this? Okay. Like people often ask me to review things they've written. So I was an editor of Back to Godhead for 30 years. And one of the things you notice was that if you ask an author to change one sentence, they sometimes just say, well, forget it, I just won't even submit it. You're not going to accept every sentence I wrote as perfect. What to speak of if you try to tell somebody that there's something wrong with their motives or there's something wrong with their character? Try that one. Like, forget it. You know, I'm sorry to say that even among devotees, you often have to tiptoe around people's false ego. Like one time, one of my godsisters asked me, you know, what's my biggest problem? And I said, you don't have any problems. And she was pestering me for a long time. And finally, I very stupidly said, well, it's a small problem. Really, you don't have any big problems, but it's this problem. And then for weeks, she was yelling at me, sending me these heavy emails and texts and yelling, how could you dare say I have this problem? And I'm thinking, well, you asked. So, you know, it's very difficult. And if someone's not humble, you can't, because part of understanding the absolute truth is understanding our distance from the absolute truth, understanding that bahirmukhe, that we're intentionally turning from the absolute truth, and you cannot understand the absolute truth until you understand you're intentionally turning from the absolute truth, because until you understand you're intentionally turning from the absolute truth, you cannot intentionally turn toward the absolute truth. Does that make sense? Why can't I see anybody here? Can you tell me why I can't see anybody in the room? I have to know that I am intentionally turning away. Show me, everyone. Well, you have to turn this way. So you have to hit people's false ego in order to show them the absolute truth. You just have to. There's not an alternative. And without humility, you cannot help a person dismantle their false ego. It's just completely impossible. Which is why there are many people in the world who are staunch religionists and don't really get anywhere. You know, they're following some process strictly, but they don't want to dismantle their false ego. They don't want to dismantle their anarchas. Prabhupada talks about this a lot. And so they're just stuck in this place. They don't progress. So without humility, it's impossible. And once there's humility, it's so easy. It's so easy to teach somebody who admits they don't know, who are coming to you because they think that maybe you know something that they don't know, and who are willing to take correction. At least to think about it, to consider it, to turn it over and say, oh, you might be right. And then the other element, of course, is grace. We have this wonderful word, anugrahāt. So I was really researching the anugrahāt. In many traditions, this word means divine grace, spiritual grace, the grace of God. It can also mean, in general, a favor or a blessing. But usually it means something very special. And someone who's a teacher has to have grace to be an effective teacher. I mean, I've had teachers who didn't have any grace, who didn't have any mercifulness, who didn't have any compassion. Have you ever had teachers like that? Learning from them is extremely difficult. They make the learning more difficult by their lack of compassion, their lack of by grace. I don't mean like dancing grace. I mean like mercy grace. Because to be a teacher, you have to voluntarily give of yourself to the students. You have to voluntarily give your time, your energy, your thoughtfulness. You have to voluntarily think, what will make things easier for people? How can I make this easy and fun? If you really want to be a good teacher. You have to have tremendous patience, because somebody might not understand the first, the second, the third, or the 100th time. And you need to be able to explain things in so many different ways. Like Srila Prabhupada comments that Krishna at the end of the Bhagavad Gita, when he says, Arjuna, have you understood everything? That Krishna was prepared to recite the whole Bhagavad Gita again if Arjuna didn't understand. And we find even within the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna is repeating himself sometimes, isn't he? Repeating concepts, sometimes repeating whole verses, clarifying. Yes? And when you're a transcendental teacher, you have to be a via medium for the grace of God. And why is the grace of God needed? Because conditioned souls have voluntarily turned their face away. Conditioned souls have betrayed the kindness and the love of God. And so some grace and forgiveness on the part of God is necessary to restore the relationship. If I've been very kind and loving and giving to someone and they have turned against me, they have to have some, in order to restore the relationship, they have to have some humility, and I have to have some forgiveness. You felt? We have to reach from both ends. And why should Krishna be forgiving? If we look in our hearts, are we deserving of Krishna's absolute forgiveness? Could we pay for it? Could we earn it? It's just, well, I'm going to chant my rounds and I'm going to go to Mangalartik and follow the principles and read the books. Okay, I've ticked all the boxes. Like some kind of a vending machine. I put my money in, I push the buttons, I should get my can of soda. It's just like, it's not like that. It's not something mechanical like that. And Prabhupada talks about order supply. He uses the word order supplier. Prabhupada ran a pharmaceutical business. So he must have had vendors from whom he bought his supplies, and that we called order suppliers. God, it's not like that. It's not like, I go online and I put in my credit card number and I pick what I want and then it shows up at my doorstep. Okay, I'm just going to do this and this and this ritual, and then I'm going to be liberated. I'm going to get prema. We're talking about a personal relationship, which means that Krishna has to voluntarily decide to forgive us. And that is best done when we make friends with one of his friends. So Srila Prabhupada's quoting yasya prasādād bhagavat-prasādaḥ. And Raghunath Das Goswami in his Manastriksha, he talks about Guru as Mukunda Shrestha. He's the good friend of the Lord. And Prabhupada writes in Bhagavad Gita, the devotees of the Lord are more merciful than the Lord because they know the purpose of the Lord. The Lord remains neutral. He has to remain neutral. He's not biased. And you can't flatter him, or deceive him. But if we're very deeply humble and we beg for this mercy, then the Guru, who's the friend of God, the devotee who's the friend of God, may say to the Lord, my dear Lord, can you be kind to this person? I had an experience many years ago with one devotee lady who I had never met. I didn't know her at all, and for reasons that I still do not understand, she decided that I was a terrible person who should be attacked and destroyed, and she was writing nasty letters about me, and it was really kind of awful. And I had no idea why she was doing this or what prompted it. I never even met her. And it was so bad that when I visited a temple where she lived, I actually walked around the building so I wouldn't run into her. And then I found out that we had a very good mutual friend, that one of my close friends was also close friends with her. And I thought, well, if so-and-so, if my good friend is friends with this person, there must be something nice about this person. Otherwise, why would my friends be friends with her? And so I started writing to this lady. And she would write back usually nasty, and I would ignore the nasty, and I'd pick up anything that was nice, and I would respond to that. And after about 6 months, we ended up having at least a cordial relationship. And I ended up actually meeting her in person and spending some time with her. But why? Because we had a mutual friend. And I thought, my mutual friend, she must see something good in this lady. I look at her and I see only bad. But my friend sees something good. And I found there was good. I found she was just kind of she was like a coconut. Tough on the outside and sweet once you got to know her. And then she became my advocate instead of, it was quite interesting. But that's like that with Krishna. When the devotee says, Krishna, please accept this person, that person. Please. They're my student. I've been teaching them. And they're humble. Well, if you say so, okay. And then even things that are difficult become easy with humility and grace. So, questions, comments, additions, subtractions, chastisements? I think, you guys plan when I'm going to visit and give me the most difficult verses.
Hi.
I had one last
time. It's
time.
not difficult. It's easy for you because you're humble.
There you go. I had one last time about dhīḥ,
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much. Not only for what you said today, but I've been trying to encourage devotees who give class, new devotees especially, to put themselves in the class. They sit down and they cite this and they run off all these verses and they quote this and quote, but they don't put themselves into it. The way you give class is perfect in that regard. You know how to inject your personal experiences, so we see you as a person, not just as a tape recorder reporting, whatever. Thank you very much. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Well, sometimes, like when I'm giving class to the World Hindu Congress in Indonesia, then I have lots and lots of verses and lots of Sanskrit. Yes,
yeah, it's mentioned how by the mercy of spiritual master, even if one's not intelligent, then one could become Krishna conscious. So then is there any importance then of people that are intelligent?
Are there any importance of people who are intelligent?
Yes.
Well, first of all, none of us are absolutely intelligent in Kali Yuga. So even someone who's highly intelligent in 2024 is not really very intelligent compared to other times of the earth and other beings. So everyone should keep that in mind. And no matter how intelligent we are, we tend to have limited types of intelligence. Do you follow? Like some people have a lot of logical intelligence, but not a lot of musical intelligence, or a lot of emotional intelligence, but not a lot of spatial intelligence. So we should, no matter how much intelligence we have in some way, we should always be humble. And then we should remember that Krishna says that he's the intelligence of the intelligent. So whenever we have any intelligence, whether we have it on rare occasions or as a regular thing, that's actually Krishna. Whenever we do something, we're like, whoa, I just did something so smart. That's Krishna. Now, whatever we have, we're supposed to use in Krishna's service, because it's actually Krishna's. So whatever amount or kind of intelligence that we have, we should use it to serve Krishna. But having a large amount or variety of kinds of intelligence in and of itself has nothing to do with devotion. Absolutely nothing. You can, be severely intellectually challenged and have an IQ of 55 and be very, not functional in the world, and you can be a great pure devotee of the Lord. And you can have, a 230 IQ and be a demoniac person. So intelligence in and of itself is not a sign of devotion, but we should use whatever we have for Krishna. Is that okay?
Well, in other words, is it something like so many zeros, but if you put a 1 in front of it? Yeah,
that's a nice analogy Prabhupada gives. Put a 1 in front of your zeros. I mean, all of us has some, like Prabhupada said, everyone has some extraordinary talent. And if we use our extraordinary talent in Krishna's service, that's successful life. So all of us have something. some type of intelligence, some type of ability, some type of something that we're gifted with. Having the gift doesn't mean anything if we don't use it for Krishna. Spiritually speaking, it's. Does that make sense?
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Hare Krishna, thank you for the class. You were describing how a teacher without grace is very difficult to learn from.
Yes, very.
Could you give some more like examples or principles of a good teacher, someone with grace?
Oh, sure. But it's 8:31, and I don't know if you want to open that, because that's my whole area of, That's the kind of thing I could talk about. I could give you a whole 10-day seminar on that, you see, so that's a problem. It'd be like asking Judah Karma Prabhu about evolution. Yeah, I won't be offended if you leave. I'll give you a very, very simple example. So I was once taking it was a 2-year course that I was taking in counseling and therapy. How to be a counselor, how to be a therapist. So there were 2 teachers, and one I would call spiritual but not religious, and one religious but not spiritual. The spiritual but not religious guy, he was kind of a jnani, and he knew the material backwards and forwards and inside and out and upside down, and he had actually invited me to take the very expensive courses without charge. He said it will be my good karma. And he was a vegetarian, he would come to the temple, he would take prasādām, but he was arrogant. He was so arrogant. And anytime anybody would ask a question, he would make sure that they knew that he knew more than they did. He would always communicate whenever anybody would ask anything, I am the expert teacher and you are a foolish student. And what to speak if someone asked a question of something he had already explained, or some question that showed that they didn't really understand something, he would make them feel like an idiot. He did it with a smile, but whoa. So the other one who I would call religious but not spiritual, he worked in Catholic charities, and he was not vegetarian. He didn't know anything about Krishna consciousness, but he tried to be a very religious person, and he was the epitome of humility. If someone asked a question, he would say, that's a really good question. I don't know if that's really pertinent to what we're talking about right now, but I'm so glad you brought it up. We discussed that last week, and what you might want to do is if you go to page 20 in that handbook, you might find out some more information about it. If you still have some more questions, maybe we could discuss it later. People would ask things, and he'd go, I don't know about that. Does anyone else have some idea? And as I watched these 2 week after week, because they would take different sessions, and I decided, wow, I'm sometimes like the arrogant one, and I want to be more like the humble one. I saw this with my godbrother Rasamandala Prabhu. I don't know if any of you know him, in London. So we were on a committee to start the Avanti schools. And one of the members of that committee was difficult to have on a committee because she would bring up things that were not relevant to what we were talking about on a regular basis. And he was always respectful. Consistently. That's a great point. Maybe we can schedule some time to talk about that. And I started noticing the phrases that he would use to deal with people, who brought up things that were, frankly, stupid questions, or irrelevant questions, or distractions, or he would always deal with it in a way that showed great respect to the person. And I started really trying to consciously emulate that in my own teaching. Another example I can give you was in graduate school, so that same professor who realized he was a materialist, he was at the far end of being inconsiderate and not merciful to the students. Like he had all of his teaching material on transparencies. You know what transparencies are? They're clear. It's a clear piece of plastic, and you would have the material typed on this clear piece of plastic, and then there was a device, for those of you who are my age, called an overhead projector, where you put this clear plastic with the words on it there, and there's lights and mirrors, and it projects it onto the wall. You know, this is like before PowerPoint and stuff. And this is what he had. He was been a professor for a long time. But they had new tech in the school where you put the paper, they assumed you didn't have transparencies. They assumed you had paper. And you put the paper on the desk, and then it used lights and mirrors. But when you used something clear instead of paper, the lights and mirrors created a prism effect. And so when you look at the writing on the wall, it was full of rainbows. And it wasn't like, you know, rainbows. It made it really hard to see. It made it really hard to read. And he didn't care. He just didn't care. Or we had materials that we had to get at the beginning of the semester. We had textbooks, and then we also had to get printed materials, articles to read. And he had 2 copies of these for 35 students. They were in his office, and you had to get them from his secretary and make your own photocopies. The office was closed at 2 in the afternoon, and our class was from 7 to 10. We were all working people. So how were you going to get to the office during office hours and get this? And you had to make these copies before the second class of the semester. And he didn't care how you were going to figure out how to do this, how 35 people were going to make their own copies from 2 copies that was in an office that closed. He didn't care. He made easy things difficult. You understand? Then we had other professors. They would make sure that whatever tech they use was something that we could see, something that we could understand. When they needed to give us copies of things, they would arrange to make the copies, and then they would sell it to us for the cost of the copies. So they would just hand it to us. They made it easy, or they had it online where we could just download it from online and we could access it from online. They made the difficult things easy. They would give us summaries of things. That one teacher also, he would give us 150 pages a week to read of very dense PhD level material. And you could not possibly do all of that with all of your other courses and all of your papers. You could not. It was just impossible to do all of that. And other professors would give us things that we could actually do. So those are just some examples. Is that all right? I could give you hundreds more, but those are some that really struck me as very easy ways of how teachers can show compassion or not compassion, or what our teacher Prabhu was talking about. Are you going to talk to people as if you're a person and they're people? Are you going to give them information that's useful and relevant to them, or are you going to give them information just for the sake of giving them information? You know, I've seen devotees do like, you know, PowerPoints that are full of Sanskrit terminology and very technical things, and there's more text to read on a slide than anybody can possibly read because the font becomes this small when the text is like that, and you're looking at all that, and you're going through it very, very quickly. At the end, if you remember anything, you're lucky, and what are you going to do with this? Who knows? You follow? Yes? I remember once going to one devotee who I like very much and respect very much, and he tends to give extremely complex, intellectually complex classes. And one that I was attending, which was a wonderful, wonderful class, but it was so complex. And I said, Maharaj, do you think you could give us a handout? Could you give us something? Because he had no power, he was just talking. I said, can you give us some chart or some graph or something? And he was kind of offended. He's like, I'm supposed to make it easy for you? I'm like, yeah. I probably could have said this, you know. Yathāhaṁ manda-dhīr, yoṣā bhavad-anugrahāt. I'm just a stupid woman. Can you show me some mercy? Okay, we should probably end here, yes? So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your hospitality here in New York. I'm sorry, I have to leave super early tomorrow morning. So again, thank you. Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.